There is a video of another lecture I gave about how this work came about. I'll give a short talk about it, but that's not what this talk is really about. This is about further in. So you can search for a video that tells more of the story of how I got here and how I, a lot of my backstory. I'm not going to give too much of that. I'm going to stay on what's going on in here. About 4 or 5 years ago, I had quit painting Civil War battlefields as a subject, and I was moving and trying to figure out what my next projects were, and I had a couple ideas, and a couple of them were just way out of reach for where I am in my life, so there was no way logistically to pull them off. And a friend of mine I talked to said they heard me, and they were like, "You should do that France project," and I was like, "Okay." So I basically, not really crowdfunded, it was 10 collectors that know me were willing to put commissions in ahead of time. So I raised the money, went to France, started taking pictures, came back home, started painting paintings, went back to France again, went back to France again. So I've been 4 times now. I've got about 20,000 photographs that I'm using as the body to look at, to work from. What I'm really interested in getting at is trying to make real the lives of the men and women that were sacrificed or changed or destroyed or impacted by a series of events that happened in World War I. We don't really think about it. We are actually exposed to the changes they made, and there's lots of things that happens that it's part of the narrative. But the bigger part is, it was an industrial war. The scale of the battlefield, the active fighting zone's probably 20 miles wide at any place. So the active battle zone is 20 miles wide. This is before bomb. The airplanes are in towards the end of it, but this is just artillery and men fighting. Inside the zone of 20 miles, you're liable to get killed at any given moment. And so when you're looking at some of the paintings that have longer vistas, you're actually not seeing off the battlefield. You're looking across, but everything you see is part of it. The immensity of it is kind of staggering. The numbers are kind of staggering. I initially went over, my interest was about Americans and about the American soldiers that went over and fought. They ended up fighting for about 7 months, actually. Had horrible casualties for the time they were there, but they were a small part of a huge event. The first time I went, a friend of mine who's English told me that I couldn't focus on the Americans. I didn't understand the story, so he took me to the Somme. And the Somme Battlefields are, this one's in this one, these, there's a couple, you'll see the names, but these, it's some of the most, it's beautiful countryside, it's rolling, it's fecund, it's so beautiful, it's hard to imagine the level of hate that occurred there. And that's actually the men called it that. They would attach the word hate to a lot of things. They had things called hate belts, where they would take souvenir buttons off of dead men or emblems and attach them to a belt. It was like counting coup. They called them hate belts. The air would be full of hate, which is shrapnel or steel or bullets. In some places they talk about it. They talk about the word hate is a noun. It's everything. 86, I went to Italy on a studies abroad program, and I had a small mental breakdown because I was doing abstract painting at the time, and I tried to translate that into something I could do in Italy, and it didn't work. And a friend of mine I was lucky enough, told me, just go paint landscapes, John. And she actually showed here, her name was Judy Jones. She laughed at me and told me I needed to go paint landscapes. This is basically a map that was made right at the end of the battles in the Somme. It's a body dispersal map. The English army had to figure out where to put graveyards. They had to go out and find all these men because the fighting went on for months. The paintings of the Somme in here are on this map. This painting in particular was painted because of this map. In July 1st, the battles of the Somme opened up. It was one of the largest bombardments in the history of the world. I mean, the level of millions and millions of shells. The first day of the Battle of the Somme, the English suffered 60,000 casualties in one afternoon. The first day. It was a debacle. Except in a couple places on the southern end of the battlefields. Here. The division that was attacking here actually captured their objectives. They made their objectives, they consolidated, and they moved forward. 14 days later, they attack Longueval and they attack Highwood right here. Longueval is that painting over there. So when you're looking at that painting, there's a spot on this map right here that I can show you. So you're standing, in that place, you're standing in a small square. If you're standing there at the end of the battles of the Somme, graves registration says within 100 feet of you, there's 22 men dead, buried, or laying in the field still. At Crucifix Crossroads, this is a 5 roads come together. Everybody, all the men that were fighting in Highwood would be marching up these roads. We're talking tens of thousands of men. And tens of thousands of shells are being dropped on this field. So at Highwood, they march up this place. They come from a place called Happy Valley. And the other name for it's Death Valley or Flatiron Copse. The Germans know there's men marching through it, and they're constantly being shelled. So as the troops are moving forward, it's called wastage. But all the numbers back here, they're not actually, most of the numbers back here are from men being shelled indirectly as they're moving towards the front. So July 14th, 2 weeks after the very initial attacks, they're still fighting all across this area. This everything in a line across here, they're fighting. July 14th, on this ground, they sent some men across. Actually, a sergeant went up, and the day before there was nobody in the woods. He went up. The next day they sent somebody up, and they met a German patrol, and the Germans were filtering. The Germans had been pushed off a ridge. They moved back, and they were filtering back into this. This was the highest point in the area. All the ground around it's flat. It rolls down for about a mile. So where you're standing here, you're looking towards Highwood. You're looking towards the main line of German resistance, and they're right in front of you. Where the green rolls down, it's called High Alley. It's a trench that runs, there's a road and a trench that runs up, and men are moving forward in this and then positioning themselves and fighting. Actually, the 14th, they capture, there would be 3 German artillery pieces right there in that patch of tan. They were dug in, they captured 3 pieces of artillery. They were there the whole battle. They fought, and they ended up falling back to this line during the first couple of days of the battle because it was fluid. It's almost impossible to imagine, but I'm trying, and we're going to get there. Highwood is one of the few sections on this map that actually doesn't have any numbers on it. because they never could clear the place. And once the woods were shattered, after fighting there for 2.5 months, they fight on this ground for 2.5 months. All the dead on the field they are either in shell holes or in trenches or just on the ground. There's no grave recovery for 2.5 months because it's not safe. It takes them 2.5 months to finally push past the top of that hill to the other side. In the course of it, countless units are moving up, moving back out. The word, to the men of this generation, Highwood is an awful, awful name. So anyway, they never could clear the wood. There was so much ordnance. The trees had grown back over. It was 2 years before the war finally ended, and the war actually crossed this battlefield 2 more times. So they never could clear the wood. So they know there's mass graves. In the total battles for the Somme, there's 72,000 British men unaccounted for. They never found their bodies. 72,000. When you look at this is just identifiable remains, or what these numbers are giving you. When I saw this grid, it stuck in my head. About 3 days before the last time I went to France, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I could see this grid in my head. And what I'm sharing with you, this is inspiration for this painting, but the painting's not done yet. So I woke up and I saw the grid and I said, I need to go back there, I need to stand there, and I need to see the grid in my head, and I need to look at the place, trying to figure out how to paint that so I can actually convey how it feels to stand there. So I got back from France in, when was opening? I got back from France November 14th, and I started this painting, and I just finished it about 4 days ago. Well, to this point. No, the thing is, after 2 months, there's no blood. There's just uniforms and yeah. So it's uniforms. So I'm shooting for khaki, and I'm shooting for Feldgrau. Because the thing is, I'm telling you the story that I know the best, which is the English. But the English, when they talk about coming up to this field, they say there's Germans all over it from the fighting beforehand. German dead. The Germans record, they don't actually have good records of how many men they lost. They figure upwards of 8,000 were lost in the woods, dead, because they kept feeding them in, trying to hold this line for months. So it was constant counterattacks, constant pull out of the edge of the woods would be shelled again.
Why was this area so important?
Because it was high ground you could see for miles and miles and miles. So the trick, here's one of the reasons the war is so awful, is communications are still in the era of horse. They just barely have field telephones, like wired telephones, but the wire's constantly getting cut. Airplanes can fly around, but there's no real radio. At this point in the war, the radios didn't work. So everything is by runner or horse. But everything else is modern. You've got machine guns, you've got fast-firing artillery, you've got all these things. So you can't even tell where the edge of the front is. So you're getting shelled. Both sides are getting shelled. Things happen in the dark. You know, they're fighting in the dark. A lot of the fighting here goes on in the dark because they can't move men up without getting them killed. I mean, once you step foot on this field, the whole field is flat. And a machine gun will kill you at a mile. And they don't even aim at you. They're just traversing. They just set the traverse and they just aim. So this field, the field was in high corn, so it was wheat about this deep when it started. By the end of September, it looks like this, but there's no green in it. It's just raked ground, chalk, and craters. Okay. There's also a couple hundred horses in this field. They actually, one of the only cavalry assaults in the course of the Somme happened up here. That would be about scale. And this painting's only like 200. We're 250 yards across the back. Probably narrows up in the front. This is just one of these grids. I was shooting just for one of these grids. So in the grid I've got, I'm looking across a grid that's got 59 men in the foreground, identifiable. In the ground on this edge, the next grid over is 230 men, and there's actually two mass graves, which is what this is a cemetery where they formed a cemetery basically on a shell crater that had 69 men thrown in it there's a cemetery for the Black Watch in here. This is London Cemetery. It was a PALS unit. PALS units were raised from neighborhoods, and they were all friends, and they were guaranteed to serve together. The problem is they've actually taken a grid and put it on a couple of these cities where PALS were raised, and it's the red dots lining the streets is solid across the middle of a city. And I could do this to every single painting in here. Almost every single painting in this room, if we started looking at the numbers, they would look like this, especially the ones from the Somme, especially. They all have stories. Initially, I actually thought of doing it in red, but it wouldn't do it. It would scream off, and you wouldn't look at it. You wouldn't be able to see it. You know, when you see this, for Verdun, that if I did that to a painting of Verdun, that's what it would look like. And so I'd already done it, and when I worked out how I was going to do this, I didn't want you to walk into this room and the first thing you see is red marks all over this painting. I'm hoping the viewer walk up. And the best part is where this is not going to be explained to anybody. It's just going to be there for the rest of the show, and hopefully people will work out what it is I'm trying to say. I'm not going to do this again. I'm shooting for 59 in the foreground. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull that off. But 59 in the foreground, I mean, the thing is, it would almost, if you thought about the angle, if you're looking, it would almost be solid as you look at the horizon. And that's one of the, I hate being, there's no way not to be morbid. As you came up to these battlefields, you smelled them from miles away. These fields were so foul, it was years before they actually could use these fields for anything. It took the farmers years to clear these fields off. Well, they're covered with craters. Think about craters like 7-8 feet deep all over the whole thing. If you look at Google Maps of certain places in the Somme and in the Argonne and around Verdun, you can see the shadows of the craters. You can see the shadows of the craters 100 years out if the field's fallow. I'm pretty close, I think, to what I want to do. And then there's one thing I got to do yet. That's London Cemetery. That's the Cross of the Fallen. I can't remember how many men are buried in that cemetery. It's a pretty high number. Shit. Okay. That's it. Alan Mackintosh was a Highlander, Scottish Highlander infantry captain in the 51st Division. On July 22nd, they came up from Crucifix Crossroads. They came up this road, formed, and attacked over that slope towards where London Cemetery marker is. They were there till the 30th of the month. So that puts them there 8 days fighting. September 22nd is when the fighting on this, where this land was where this was cleared enough for them to start clearing these fields. He wrote this to the 51st Division, Highwood, July, August 1916. Oh, gay we were in spirit in the hours of the night, when we lay at rest at Albert and waited for the fight. Gay and gallant were we on the day that we set forth, but broken, broken, broken is the valor of the North. The wild war pipes were calling, our hearts were blithe and free, when we went up the valley to the death we could not see. Clear lay the wood before us in the clear summer weather, but broken, broken, broken are the sons of the heather. In the cold of the morning, in the burning of the day, the thin line stumbled forward, the dead and dying lay. By the unseen death that caught us, by the bullets' raging hail, broken, broken, broken is the pride of the gale.